Crypt Custodian presents itself as a quirky, charming top-down adventure with a unique premise. Set in a world where you're tasked with cleaning and maintaining the afterlife, the game immediately sets itself apart with its unusual take on the Metroidvania genre. The visuals are simple but effective, with pixel art that captures the eerie yet humorous atmosphere of the game. The story in Crypt Custodian takes a lighthearted approach, centering around Pluto, a mischievous cat who is sentenced to serve as the afterlife's eternal janitor. Following a chaotic encounter with the afterlife guardian, Kendra, Pluto is banished from the palace and given the task of cleaning up the vast, trap-filled grounds that surround it. The story is fairly light, focusing more on the world's setting than a deep narrative. One of the standout aspects of Crypt Custodian is how seamless the overall experience feels. The transitions between areas are impressively fluid, with no noticeable loading times interrupting the flow as you move from one section of the crypt to another. The game runs smoothly throughout, with responsive controls that make both exploration and platforming feel precise and satisfying. Gameplay in Crypt Custodian is where the game's strengths and weaknesses become more apparent. At its core, it's a Metroidvania, with a focus on exploring the crypt, unlocking new areas, and discovering abilities to progress. The few puzzle-solving elements are well implemented, requiring sometimes clever thinking. These puzzles are perhaps one of the game's most enjoyable feature, with the right balance of challenge and satisfaction once solved. However, the combat feels somewhat underdeveloped. It's basic, and while serviceable, it never really evolves beyond simple attack patterns. You'll encounter a variety of enemies throughout the crypt, but their designs and behaviors tend to repeat often, making combat feel repetitive as the game progresses. Mini-boss encounters are present, but they don't offer the challenge or intensity you might expect from a game in this genre. That said, the main boss fights still manage to feel satisfying, with larger-than-life designs and more dynamic attack sequences that offer a decent sense of accomplishment. Even if the combat lacks depth elsewhere, these moments help break up the repetition. The difficulty curve is generally mild. For a Metroidvania, the game is fairly forgiving. Most of the challenge comes from the exploration, rather than from combat or tough platforming sections. There are some tricky areas that require precision and careful timing, but overall, the game feels more relaxed in its pacing compared to other titles in the genre. This can be a positive for players looking for a more casual experience, but it may leave others wanting a bit more intensity, especially in terms of platforming and combat depth. In conclusion, Crypt Custodian is an enjoyable, if somewhat limited, take on the Metroidvania formula. Its quirky premise, charming presentation, and solid puzzle design make it worth playing, especially for fans of lighter, less combat-focused adventures. However, the lack of depth in combat and a somewhat repetitive structure keep it from reaching the heights of other titles in the genre. It's a good game, just not a great one. Overall, I'd give Crypt Custodian a 7 out of 10.